And we are live now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Reedsy Live. Reedsy's ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. Today, we are joined by an author, a teacher, a screenwriter who's going to be talking to us all about horror through the prism of the Save the Cat method. For those of you who have been around and seen this before, will remember we had one on Save the Cat from last year. We've been in touch with the organisation since, and they've got an exciting new book on the horror genre coming out. And its author, Jamie Nash, will be joining us in just a few short minutes to share what he knows. In the meantime, come on, welcome. Please do let us know where you're coming from here in the chat. I'm going to try and bring this up right here in the comments. Fantastic. If you're joining us live, tell us where you're coming from today. Always love to see old faces and new. Lee is here. Found in the margins, good afternoon to you as well. I assume by that you are west of Los Angeles, east of Los Angeles. There's my Spring Hope, North Carolina. Jada from Italy, welcome. I found in the margins from Charleston, South Carolina. Carly B. Wright is in Kentucky. Crimson Studio, 3 Dimensions is here in the UK. Patsy Quinn up in Rainy Yorkshire, or down in Rainy Yorkshire from where I am. I am based in Edinburgh in Scotland. But yes, if you are new to this, welcome. I'm Martin. I'm from the team at Reedsy. We're a marketplace that brings together authors and writers with some of the best publishing professionals in the world. So if you're looking for editors, book cover designers, marketers, translators, ghostwriters, you can find them all here on Reedsy, and we've vetted them all to make sure that you're only working with the best. Ricardo R. from Chile. Michelle Bauman from New Jersey. Welcome back, Michelle. LK Linda from Virginia. Elaine from the UK. Michelle from Sacramento, California. Great to see so many people all across the States. And Jordan from Nova Scotia. Sanchon from Argentina. Well, wonderful. This is Leah's second live. Welcome back. Glad to have you. Good to see returning writers. Angelo from Memphis, Tennessee. Stockwell Santley from West London, and not Stockwell, I suppose, in South London. Angie from Bolton, Ontario. Good to see so many people joining us. Really glad you could join us here on this Wednesday. We have been having a lot of events going on of late. With another live event on Monday, which you can catch up on. And over on Reedsy Learning, we've been having masterclasses each Monday, where we've been bringing on authors to do deep dives into topics. Those are available every single week. You can sign up to those, I believe, for $15 or signing up to a membership. But yes, I want to make sure that I've got all your all your free content coming here. I want to make sure that just because you don't want to join a membership, you don't get to learn some stuff here. Jada asks what my favorite Stephen King book is. Like a lot of boys, I'm 40 years old now, but like a lot of people my age, we read it way too young. Schools would stock all the Stephen King stuff in the library, not knowing how many explicit descriptions of boobs there are in it. So it's a real coming of age thing for a lot of us. But it, I think, was a profound one. I do, of course, love The Shining as well. Fraser Green brought their 2 cats to this. Excellent. Jordan LeBlanc shared Pet Sematary. Fantastic book as well. Where's the Session? Also another vote for Pet Sematary. Great. We may do an informal poll a little bit later on. But let's get this thing started. Got myself a little bit of an intro sequence. Welcome, everyone, to Reedsy Live. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another Reedsy Live, our ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. This week, we are getting a jump on spooky season, and we're talking about one of the most beloved, spine-tingling genres of all. We're talking about horror, and we've got ourselves a very special guest who's going to talk to us about writing horror in a very particular way. Thank you, everyone who can make it here live, and to those of you watching later, also welcome. This will be available here on YouTube for hopefully forever, so you can come back and rewatch it and check out the slide deck which we'll be having here. There will also be a Q&A, so stick around for that if you're watching live. If you are watching in retrospect, then you can enjoy typing in questions that may or may not be answered. But let's get things on the road here. I want to bring on my guest, who is a novelist, a screenwriter, and author of the upcoming Save the Cat Writes Horror. When he's not writing and selling work, he teaches screenwriting at the Maryland Institute College of the Arts, and he co-hosts the podcast Writers Blockbusters. Please welcome Jamie Nash. Jamie, how you doing?
Hey, you doing? Great. Pet Cemetery, by the way. Pet Cemetery is
That's
my
yours as well.
Stephen King
It's
book.
a popular
Yep.
option here. Patsy's throwing
Yep.
Salem's Lot into there. Pet Cemetery is
Well,
his second book, was it? His second published one. Was that Salem's Lot?
I think it came much after that. Oh, Salem's Lot. Oh yeah, Salem's Lot is the second. I thought you said Pet Cemetery. Sorry.
No, yeah, I got them mixed
yeah.
up.
Yeah, Salem's Lot. Yep. That was the second.
Fantastic.
I think Carrie, Salem's Lot. I don't know. I'll stop there. Otherwise, I'll make mistakes.
Yeah, I was doing a video the other week about how, if you're a first-time author, you should try sort of keep your word count under control using Stephen King as an example. Carrie, 60,000 words, and then everything after that. Blew them out.
Right. I think that's why some of the reason I like Pet Cemetery so much, because it's not, I went to The Stand and It and things like that, which were huge. Like you, I read It way too early. It was one of the first ones I read. And then Pet Cemetery started to bring it in line. I remember Misery was a good one because he brought it in line a little bit. They were a little bit smaller books.
Like for a while, my favorite stuff of his was that sort of modern American fable type stuff where it wasn't as horror twinge. So of that sort of Misery vein and all his novellas and such.
Yep. Me too.
Cool. But yeah, see from your description, you teach at the Maryland Institute College of the Arts. Are you based in Maryland itself?
I am. I'm in Maryland. I'm right between like Washington, D.C. and Baltimore City. So I'm kind of right in the middle.
Fantastic. Cool. Well, you've got a presentation here set up for us. I'll be sort of behind the scenes driving the car, as it were, but I'll also be keeping an eye on the comments. We'll be having a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, just put them in the comments and I'll try to keep tabs on them, and we'll have Jamie answer some questions at the end.
Okay.
Jamie, if you need anything, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you at the end.
Okay. Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. It's like I feel like meeting Martin's like a celebrity. I've seen Martin so much. So I'm Jamie. You kind of heard my bio. Save the Cat Writes Horror. I'm a horror screenwriter. If you look at my IMDb credits, it's mostly horror movies. There are some kids movies in the mix. It's a weird thing. The kids people, like the people I work for at Nickelodeon, they're scared to watch my horror movies. The horror people would never watch my Nickelodeon movies until they have kids. So all my life, I've been a fan of horror, Stephen King and things like that. And I'm also a big fan of the craft. I used to be a computer programmer. I like to come up with repeatable kind of solutions to crafty kind of problems. So that's where this book comes from. Save the Cat Writes Horror. It's my third Save the Cat book. I don't know if you can see back here, but I wrote this workbook as well. It pairs nicely with it. And this is the new book. It came out yesterday in the US. Save the Cat. So there you go. So that's it for my ads. So let's jump in. Let's jump into horror and talk some horror. So if you could, yeah. So Save the Cat's mostly known for its beat sheet, the 15 beats, right? But there's this other thing that Blake Snyder came up with in his first book called the story genres. And the story genres were basically 10 story patterns that he saw that recurred over and over. And to be honest, I was a little bit skeptical when I first read Save the Cat back in whatever it was, 2005, 2006, that they were the only 10. But I'd be hard pressed to add another one to the 10. So I only listed a couple of them here. So for example, one of the story patterns is buddy love. That can be anything from a romance story like When Harry Met Sally to E.T. to a movie like Step Brothers, which is a comedy. By the way, I'm using all movie examples here, but I promise you this book and what I'm about to tell you is agnostic. Like the details I'm telling you, it can be used for a novel, a comic book, a computer game, any kind of writing you want to do that's horror related. So anyway, buddy love, a romance story. Dude with a problem. They tend to be your thriller stories like Die Hard or North by Northwest. Golden Fleece is kind of your they're movies about people that are on quests of some sort. They're trying to claim a prize or claim a trophy. So Raiders of the Lost Ark, Lord of the Rings, Hoosiers, the basketball movie, Little Miss Sunshine, any kind of road trip movie is a Golden Fleece. And then there's Why Done It, which are mostly your mystery movies. And there's a bunch more, which you can check out and save the cat. But the one we're focused on today is the one he calls Monster in the House. Okay, so Monster in the House has three key elements. Um, there's a monster, which is either supernatural, unstoppable, or just so evil it almost goes to supernatural levels. Like that's kind of the way you want to think about it. So it doesn't have to be supernatural, but a lot of times they tend to be. The evil is just so evil that it feels almost supernatural. And the second element is the house. And the house is the big part about that I like to emphasize with the house is it's a trap. So you have to figure out when you're coming up with your monster in the house elements, what's trapping your hero? What's taking away their free will? What so they can't leave. If you have a story where your hero can just move away, then it's really not a monster in the house. You have to take away the ability for them to move away, for them to run away, for them to leave. And the last element that Blake Snyder came up with was the big one for me. So I was writing my screenplays, and I thought I knew the horror genre pretty well. And I was writing monster and house parts, but the sin part was the part I was missing. And it's the part that kind of takes things to that third level. It's the playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers. So the sin is a transgression that lets the monster in. It might create the monster. It does something, but it brings about the monster. And this sin, just to give you an example, the one I like to use, if you remember Poltergeist, Poltergeist, the reason the house was haunted was because it was they took away the tombstones and built the house over top of the tombstones. That was the sin. In Freddy Krueger, in Nightmare on Elm Street, when they murdered Freddy Krueger, when the parents murdered Freddy Krueger in secret and took the law into their own hands, that's kind of the sin that brings about the monster. If that sin is then propagated onto the children of the parents that committed the murder. So that's the rest of the sin aspect. And the one key element about monster in the house thing that you need to know. So Blake's genres are not like the blockbuster genres I grew up with. So I used to go in Blockbuster Video when I was a kid, and there would be a horror section, there would be a sci-fi section, there would be an action section, a romance section. And those genres are separate from what Blake calls genres. His genres are story patterns. So in theory, you can get a monster in the house story that's not in the horror section. And like two of my favorites from growing up are Cable Guy. It's kind of the Cable Guy's the monster. Ben Stiller's trapped with him. I'm not sure what the sin is in that. And then
He,
another one
he,
would
he
be
accepted free cable.
that's right. He accepted free cable. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, and that's exactly it. There's a sin there. And then another one, probably my favorite, is What About Bob? What About Bob is kind of a monster in the house. And the truth of the matter is, we love the monster in those two movies. Well, maybe not in Cable Guy. He might be a little annoying, but certainly What About Bob? We kind of like the monster more than the hero. So they're the key element. So Monster in the House could be a comedy movie or it could be a horror movie. So the question is, what makes a horror movie? What's special about horror movies? And there's a lot of different ways you can approach that. My big thing with horror movies is they become primarily survival stories by the end of them. At some point, they become life and death struggles, a battle for survival by the end of the movie. And what that brings up is, are all horror stories monster in the house stories? And what I've kind of discovered over the years is no. Um, because in some stories, the hero's goal um, isn't pure survival. It becomes until the final act. And a movie that came up recently that I watched, if you saw Nope, Jordan Peele's Nope, um, the thing about Nope is they are not trapped in the house. They could leave the house. Their goal throughout the movie is to get a picture, the Oprah shot, they say. If they get a picture of the monster, they can make money. So they're chasing a trophy, and that's more of a golden fleece story until the third act, and then they're trapped with the monster in their house. And in that trap, it descends, it kind of turns into a battle for survival at some point in the story. Okay. So Act 3 has all the elements of the monster in the house. That's what I found in pretty much every horror movie I've looked at. So if you see another movie that like Underworld or Hotel Transylvania that might have horror trappings because it has monsters or something like that, those might not be horror movies, even though they have monstrous characters. Um, they may have different goals and not devolve into this kind of battle for survival that you're trapped in. They might be more battles because some other thing is at stake besides their personal identity, their life, something like that. That kind of fatal primal survival mode. Okay. So next slide. Okay, so what I'd like to talk to you today about, I'm going to kind of jump around my book a little bit, but I'm going to give you a couple things to think about with horror structure in particular. So the first big question that you need to ask yourself about your horror structure, and it's really going to be the focus of today's little conversation we're having, is when do the heroes of your story realize they're in a life or death battle for survival? Okay. And this is a big determining factor. When I started to look, especially at recent horror movies, this was the big determining factor of what type of horror movie you're telling. And in my book, I have a whole bunch of subgenres for horror, which I won't talk about today. But this is almost like a bigger question, even than that, bigger than the subgenre. It's more a pacing question. And it's really asking, when do you want to put in your "we're trapped with a monster" beat? Like at some moment, everybody looks at each other and says, "We're trapped with a monster. We're all going to die." When does that happen in your story? And it's kind of a floating beat. It's kind of a beat that, if you know the Save the Cat 15 beats, this one can happen anywhere between the catalyst, which is kind of the moment that kicks off the story. It's like the first encounter with whatever the obstacle is going to be, and the break into 3, which is kind of the third act finale. Like it's kind of the thing that tips us into the third act and the finale. Is the break into 3. It's when the hero makes a decision to act and win the day in some new way in Act 3 after a long character arc and a long story plays out. So what's the moment the hero realizes, there is no escape and they have to go into survival mode? Next slide. And again, this is story pacing. There's a big story pacing question. And I've basically broken it down into 2 different categories. And the reason I do this is because, especially for the slow burn category, which we'll talk about in a second, you'll see that a lot of people get stuck on that, or sometimes they even end up in slow burn territory unintentionally. And the big thing I want to kind of highlight is things like slow burns are okay so long as there's intent. And again, with movies these days, I see more slow burn horror movies than I actually see what I call relentless pace. So here's the difference. Relentless has explosive urgency. The monster's fully engaged right in the beginning of Act 2. There's primal survival stakes front and center, And that's the movie you came to see. You came to see heroes versus monsters. And it's the we're trapped with a monster beat usually happens in Act One. The second version is the slow burn. And in the slow burn, the story is more about simmering dread. It's more like a tease. It's this long tease, this long fuse. And the audience often knows more than the hero. Like the audience might be fully aware that bad things going to happen. They saw the trailer, they read the log line, they read the back of the blurb of the book. The hero often doesn't know just how much trouble they're in a slow burn. It's slowly kind of eked out over the course of the story. And basically the big differentiator is that we're trapped with a monster beat happens at the midpoint, or sometimes even the all is lost beat. So the midpoint's in the middle, and the all is lost beat is a save the cat beat that happens around the 75% mark in a story. And it's usually a moment where somebody dies. There's kind of a whiff of death in the air. Something really horrible happens. The big betrayal happens. And it's like the worst thing that can happen to your hero. Sometimes in a slow burn, that's when the all is lost beat happens. It happens that late into the story that they realize they're in a life or death battle for survival. Okay, so next slide. So Sam Raimi, when they were doing Evil Dead, the director of Evil Dead, he had a producer tell him, fellas, no matter what you do, keep the blood running down the screen. And Sam Raimi took that to heart and literally had blood running down the screen of Evil Dead. If you ever see it, it literally runs across the lens. But they also took it to heart that once the monster showed up around the catalyst, it was nonstop attacks and survival, attacks and survival. And that's kind of what relentless horror is. The monster shows up and it never lets up. It's just a game of survival. It's a chess match, so to speak, of attacks and defense and trying to beat the monster. So in relentless horror, before the fun and games kick off, some things need to be established in Act One. Okay, the monster in the house are clearly introduced. This is going to happen in Act One. The hero knows they're locked in a life or death battle for survival. That way the chess match can actually happen. And the last but not least, the promise of the premise is the battle. That's kind of the movie you came to see. You came to see a movie that is a battle for survival. And I think I have some examples in the next slide. Okay, so some examples are Scream. Scream kicks off, it kicks off with the Drew Barrymore scene in the very beginning. But right at the catalyst, the hero, Sydney, she's getting attacked by Ghostface. And she's locked in a battle. That Ghostface keeps coming for her and her group of friends. So the whole movie is kind of a chess match. It's a little bit of a whodunit, but the monster's coming at her the whole time. Same with Don't Breathe. They're trapped in the house with the monster. The monster's trying to kill them. They're trying to get out or kill the monster. Final Destination, same way. Evil Dead, we already talked about. The Descent, it's kind of a monster movie that kicks off pretty early. A Quiet Place, Train to Busan. Most zombie movies are relentless horror. That the monster attacks around the catalyst and it becomes a battle for survival. And then Talk to Me. Next slide. So in slow burn horror, there's some variance. There's some wiggle room. The hero and the monster relationship can take a whole bunch of forms. And in the fun and game, I should scramble back here for those of you who don't know Save the Cat. So the fun and games section is the beginning of Act Two. Blake Snyder calls this the fun and games. And the way he looks at it, it's the promise of the premise. It's the movie or the book, it's the blurb on the back of the book, the movie, the trailer promises. So one of my favorite movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, you would expect the fun and game section would be Indiana Jones hunting for the Lost Ark. That's what it would be. That's the movie promised from the trailer. And that's what's delivered at the beginning of Act Two. And that's the fun and games. And in relentless horror, that's what happens. If you promise a killer killing teenagers like Scream, that's what's happening in the fun and game section. If you if you suggest, like in Don't Breathe, people trapped with this killer inside a house that he's locked down, that's what happens at the beginning of Act Two, the fun and game section. But slow burn's different. So slow burn usually doesn't have the killer trying to kill the hero at the end of Act Two for a bunch of different reasons. One, the hero, and I use the term hero, they could be a bad person, but it's kind of the focus of your story. Whoever the focus of your story is, who I'm saying your hero is, the POV character, the main protagonist. They could be unaware. The hero doesn't realize they're already in a survival story. They could be ignorant. The hero sees the monster, but doesn't yet see it as a threat. Like this happens in a lot of haunted house movies. They see some Poltergeist kind of has this. They see some ghosts around the house. They see something creepy, but they kind of are like, it's fun. It's not dangerous. They kind of gaslight themselves a little bit. Maybe they gaslight people around them, gaslight them, like the Babadook or something like that. So they don't really see the threat. They're just like, it's fine. There's some creepy supernatural thing, but it's not going to hurt me. They're distracted, and sometimes this goes hand in hand with ignorant. The monster is active, but the hero is focused elsewhere. They have some other life event. They have some other goal in their life. They're too busy to even bother with this monster that's around. They're not yet trapped. So sometimes the monster is around, but they're not trapped with it. So they're not really scared. They're like, I'm okay. As long as I'm not trapped, as long as I can drive away, I'm fine. But they're not yet trapped. And last but not least is kind of the delay of doom. The monster hasn't appeared yet, but we, the audience, know it's coming. And something like Halloween. One of my favorite horror movies is Halloween. I watched it when I was like 7 years old or something. It's kind of like a Stephen King book. But Michael Myers is kind of coming, but Laurie, she isn't really aware, Jamie Lee Curtis's character, she isn't really aware that she's in any danger to the very end of the movie, to like the 75-minute mark. But the monster is active. He just hasn't appeared in her world yet. And sometimes the monster, like in a movie like Sinners, if you've seen Sinners, no spoiler, but the monster really doesn't appear till about the 50-minute mark. And then it doesn't really show up in the hero's life to about the 75-minute mark. So it's another delay of doom. The monster kind of hasn't arrived on the stage yet. Next slide. So in a slow burn horror, the fun and games is not focused on the battle for survival. This kind of important promise of the premise section isn't focused on the battle for survival. Now, in my film world, and I know in novel writing as well, these stories can in some way be harder to pitch, because if you kind of a logline purist, the way you look at loglines is they state your hero, what their goal is in the story, what the stakes are if they fail, and what the obstacle is in the way, right? So Raiders of the Lost Ark is really easy to do that with. Indiana Jones, hunting for the Lost Ark, Nazis in the way. If he doesn't get it, they'll use it as a weapon to win the war, right? Hero, goal, obstacle, stakes. But with a slow burn story, in some ways you have to cheat, because while those things take place in the fun and games, your hero pursuing the goal, obstacle, and stakes, in slow burn, a lot of times the most interesting part doesn't happen until the midpoint or later. So I'll give you an example like Alien, okay? The first half of Alien is really ambiguous, mysterious, tension-filled, dread-filled, but the monster doesn't appear on stage to the midpoint, right? So if you were a logline purist, if you're a pitch purist, you'd often, you'd have to pitch something else besides a monster, trapped in the house. Sorry, motion in my house. The aliens coming to get me. The monster trapped in the spaceship with the crew. Like that wouldn't be your pitch. If you were a purist, right? It would be something about like a recovering, an alien and bringing it back on the ship and the mystery of it and things like that. That would be your pitch. And that would be an okay pitch, but it'd be more mysterious. And a lot of times you'd almost get dinged for not being more concrete and specific. You'd get questions like, I'm not sure what your story is about. So stories like, believe it or not, Jurassic Park, the monsters don't get loose to about the middle of the movie. It's a little bit before the middle of the movie, but it takes a while for them to get loose. It's like the kind of awe and wonder of a theme park filled with cloned dinosaurs is really what the fun and happens in the fun and games. A movie like Get Out leaves its log line or its kind of premise as a mystery. Same with Hereditary. Same with Midsommar to an extent. To a certain extent, The Witch, Sinners, Barbarian recently, Skinamarink, all these movies kind of leave mysteries. So your log lines aren't as great, and sometimes they're harder to pitch. I don't really have a great solution for the harder to pitch part, except to say horror agents and managers, if you're in my world, or if you're in the literary world, the agents, they kind of understand this and they just look at it. They need the synopsis more than the log line in some ways. And I've even seen people say that the best log lines, and I think this is reflecting the slow burn. Um, I don't really believe this, but I'll tell you what I've seen some professionals say. They see some of the best log lines for horror movies are actually the mysterious ones, the ambiguous ones, the ones that break the rules and leave something for the next page. I think that's a hard way to approach things if you're a struggling writer who's trying to get representation. But nonetheless, I think it speaks to the slow burn thing because some of the best stories are the ones we go in cold, right? They're the ones we don't know anything about and they just start delivering. And that's what the slow burn horror is doing these days. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to kind of take you through some beats, and we're going to start with Act 1, The Ordinary World. And I'll show you some Save the Cat beats. It's kind of hard to see the white on white. I don't know what happened to my slide there, so I apologize. But Act 1, the part you can't see, is actually stated on the right side. So Act 1, The Ordinary World, is opening image, setup, theme stated, catalyst, debate, and break into two. It's basically the first 25% of your story, and it's setting up the promise of the premise. The break into two usually lands with your hero taking action that chooses a goal. There's an obstacle in the way, and there's stakes. That's what break into two is. So it's usually your log line. All your log line elements come into play in the break into two. Okay, next slide. So I'm just gonna kind of jump around some beats here to give you some ideas. But one of the Save the Cat beats is opening image. And what you'll find in almost all horror stories, especially these days, is that opening image has really become the opening scare. And kicking off with a scare is not only like this horror tradition that's been around forever. It's, you think of Halloween, you think of The Exorcist, the kind of prequel scene. You think of Night of the Living Dead in the graveyard. It's been around forever, but it's almost become essential in movies, at least in the age of Netflix, where people only give like 30 seconds to decide whether or not they're going to watch, the movie. But also in books, that it's kind of that thing that if you're only sending a chapter or so, you really need to send a chapter that shows your horror chops if that's what you're writing. If it starts purely as drama, it's a little trickier to say, hey, this is a horror novel. So it's almost a mandatory thing, and it usually, the good news in the slow burn world is it can buy you some time. If you have 12 minutes of ordinary world setup, like setting up your heroes, you can get like the audience will trust you that it's a horror movie for about 10 minutes if you can give them a good opening scare that kind of plants a bomb under the table, that adds the tension that drives people to keep watching and keep going. Okay, so next slide. So here are some types of opening scares. So if you're thinking about, if you're at the early stages of your story and you don't have an opening scare yet and you're not sure what to do, these are some common ideas. These are the common types. One is the first kill. And this is when, the monster strikes the first time. And it could be the first time in that place. It could be the first time ever. So Jaws is an example of this. Scream, the Drew Barrymore scene we talked about, is an example of this. The next one is the flash forward. And this is a glimpse of like some future horror and it actually glimpses like into the future of your story. So if you think about, if you saw Sinners kind of starts with a scene that happens at the end. It actually takes a little scene and it makes you ask the question, how did we possibly get here? That's the bomb it plants under the table. It shows like an aftermath scene. Similar, Don't Breathe. If you watch Don't Breathe, it shows a scene that we'll see again in the 90-minute mark of the movie. And it shows that at the very beginning to plant a seed. How did we get here? Something really bad's going to happen. And that's the flash forward scene. By the way, side note, the flash forward is my least favorite opening scare. I tend to feel sometimes it's a cheat, like when you don't have any other way to do an opening scare for some reason. Some people will go to a flash forward because it's the only one left. I've seen it work very effectively. It's just my least favorite. I'd say look through the other ones before you choose flash forward, unless you have a really good reason for it. The third, origin of the horror. So these are usually like prologue scenes. It shows how it all began. So we see, Michael Myers. It is technically his first kill, but it's his first kill when he was a child. 28 days later, we see how the kind of zombie disease in that movie came about. We see the opening scene of how that got loose, and it shows us almost the prologue and the origin story. Then we have the horror before the horror, and this one's a little different. This one is if you see Midsommar, for example, or The Descent, it oftentimes it almost shows you what's called the shard of glass in Save the Cat terms. The shard of glass is some trauma that sets up the character arc. Sometimes people call it the ghost or something like that, but there's some trauma in the hero's background that sets up the character arc. And sometimes this is so horrific that you could start your horror novel with it. And it might not be the monster, like in Midsommar, it's this kind of tragic suicide. In The Descent, it's an accident. But if it has like a horror feel, I think Megan did it recently with like a car accident or something. Sometimes that's a good way to get an opening scare, and it additionally sets up this trauma of your hero. Incidentally, Finding Nemo, not a horror movie, it kind of does that in the beginning as well. It sets up this horrible event. And then last but not least is the dread start. And if you're not going to do a true opening scare, the thing I would suggest is you load up your initial story with dread. And in my book, I have a lot of different ways where you can load up with dread. Okay, next slide. Break into 2, Relentless horror. So the break into 2, the scene that happens right before the fun and games in Relentless horror, that's usually the moment your hero realizes they're trapped in a battle for survival. So the monster is coming for them. They're trapped in the house and they know it. Next slide. The break into 2 of slow burn horror, so the moment before the fun and games, it could be a bunch of different things. Okay, the hero commits to some course of action that will inevitably lead to them colliding with the monster in a battle for survival. And the big determining factor is the hero is not trapped in a house with a monster. And that could be for a bunch of different reasons. The monster hasn't emerged. The monster isn't recognized as being a threat, or the hero is not yet trapped in the house with the monster. Next slide. Okay, so going to Act 2A. So Act 2A, we usually, in Save the Cat, break the second act into 2 halves. They divide at the midpoint. So there's 3 acts. And Act 2A, the first 3 beats is the B story, the fun and games, and the midpoint. Next slide. And the fun and games, in a Relentless horror, for the fun and games beat, the battle for survival can get a little redundant. So the one big tip I'd like to give you is if you can find a goal for your hero, and this goes across slow burn and relentless, if you can find some goal for the fun and games section. The fun and games tends to be in a movie, it's like 30 pages. It's a big section. And some people get lost in what to do. But if your hero has a goal, it just becomes kind of this mini movie of your hero chasing the goal, and then you throw obstacles in their way. One of the things in Relentless Horror, since they're locked in a battle for survival, think of it as what could be their sub goals to survival. And I list a few things here like weapons or tools acquisition. Can we get the shotgun or something like that? Um, Discovering the monster's weakness. It could be a bit of a mystery or testing kind of phase, like, seeing what the monster, how, if it's vulnerable to something. Get out. Can we escape? Can we escape the lair or the house? Learn the lore. That kind of goes back to discovering the monster's weakness. Form alliances, maybe with, in a zombie movie, that's a common thing. Secure a hideout. Call for help. Sometimes they have to go on a rescue mission. Sometimes someone's in trouble, and that becomes their goal. It's like we have to save them before we can get out ourselves. Solve the mystery, or sometimes medical attention. Somebody's injured and they have to save them. But these are examples of sub goals. And when you get to that act 2, if you're in Relentless Horror, apart from the overall survival, think of how you can break it down into mini sub goals and mini missions. Okay, next slide. Slow burn, on the other hand, it's tricky, and it really depends on your story, because if survival isn't your story, what is the hero's goal? And that's what you have to answer. The engine of story, as you probably know from checking Reedsy out all this time, is tension, and conflict is the biggest thing that brings the tension. So where's the tension found? Where's the conflict found if it's not in the battle for survival? Because slow burn is more like a disease that gradually takes hold. You watch these symptoms kind of slowly take over, and you watch the illness get worse. It ends up in this final life or death battle, and the ordinary world slowly is poisoned by the monster. The audience tension kind of simmers because the audience knows the danger's coming closer and closer and closer, even if the character sometimes doesn't. Next slide. So slow burn horror strategies for the fun and games. Some of the things you can do to kind of keep things moving is fun and games and more debate. So we just came off the debate section, and the debate section might be, is my house haunted or something? Or there's something going on here that's mysterious if you're in a haunted house story. And the fun and game section might be, yes, my house is haunted, but can I live with it? It could be more debate. There could be more in doubt. You could extend the debate section with more questions, more tests, maybe bringing in help to kind of test if the place is haunted or what's going on. So you're almost stretching the debate section, and it delays the urgency that the audience knows is there. The second idea is the one I mentioned in Halloween. It's called Scares in the Shadows. So the monster is acting outside of the hero's awareness, and the audience holds superior position. We know more than the hero. And this kind of, the monster just keeps piling up the kills in the background. And we know that inevitably the monster is going to come face to face with the hero. Next slide. Another one is drama, drama, drama. And this one really comes from Jason Blum of Blumhouse. His big question is, what's the indie drama? What's the real life kind of indie drama, the small indie drama that gets interrupted by the horror movie? And I think you see that play out in prestige movies these days. And a lot of really good literate horror books is kind of like, at their heart, they're these indie dramas that we drop a monster into. And in those stories, you almost can continue playing out the indie drama in the fun and game section while letting the monster do its work. The monster weaves into these dramas and kind of makes an extra mess of the person's life. But you kind of get this double dose where you're seeing this indie drama, you're seeing a dramatic story take place, but you're also getting the fun of having this monster mess around with the drama. In some ways, I think it goes all the way back to Phantom of the Opera or something like that, where really that's a dramatic story at heart, but there's these monstrous kind of thing that's happening on the outside that's stirring the pot. Um, Fun and games. Fun and games equals dread in games. So the other big thing to keep in mind is dread is the star of the slow burn. Um, the anticipation of the monster coming is almost better than jump scares, and especially, in my opinion, in novel form. In movies as well, though, you can't just hit us with jump scares every second. You have to give us more and more dread. And in my book, I have a whole section on dread. I don't have time to go over it today, but I'll give you the one big thing about dread. I feel like dread is warning flags. It's warning us that a monster's there, whether the hero sees it or not. Like the audience sees it, but sometimes the hero doesn't see it. Sometimes they do, but they ignore it. Okay, next slide. The monstrous midpoint. So at the center of the story, the horror shifts gears, and at the midpoint, usually stakes escalate, secrets unravel, and survival gets harder. Next slide. So in a relentless horror, it's very much like any other kind of story. You can raise the stakes by adding a ticking clock. Somehow they're on a timer. Maybe they're bleeding out. Maybe their window to escape is closing. Sometimes it's a win. Some win stirs the monster and makes the monster focus on them. Like maybe they come face to face with the monster trying to escape, and they almost make it, and that stirs the monster. A stranger appears. Sometimes this is a mentor, or as we call in Save the Cat, a half man. Sometimes it's out of the frying pan. The escape leads to an even worse trap. So they go from one house to another that's oftentimes smaller or more dangerous. Maybe they find a new way to survive. Maybe it's a positive, but that new way to survive is very dangerous and very risky. There's also a good time for a big plot twist or an A story meets B story element. So sometimes things get more personal, and that raises the stakes. Like two people fall in love. Now there's something to lose other than myself. I might lose this person that now I'm in love with. Okay, next slide. So in a slow burn, the interesting thing is this can be the spot, and it often is, where the hero realizes they are trapped with a monster. So it's that revelation at this point. And again, it could be a win that stirs the monster. Something might happen that stirs the monster and causes them to focus, set their sights on the hero. It could be that the realization that the monster is a monster. A movie like Megan, where the monster's been with them the whole time, but it's not to the midpoint, around the midpoint, that they say, this is a monster, this is dangerous. They realize they're in a life or death struggle, kind of similar. Where sometimes they end up trapped in the house. Sometimes they're free up into the midpoint and then they're trapped. Or sometimes the fuse still simmers, but a critical event or kill or discovery starts the ticking clock to the battle for survival. And last but not least, sometimes any of the above things that I just mentioned might actually wait around to the all is lost moment. Next. And last but not least, I know we're jumping fast, but the final stand. So every monster in the house story ends with a showdown, a battle for survival after every sub goal has failed. Okay. And there are usually three common forms of these final stands. We have to kill it. We have one last chance to escape, or we must defend ourselves. And, so we have to kill it. It's literally they go to slay the thing, they banish the thing, they exorcise it. One last chance to escape becomes purely about getting out of the house. And we must defend ourselves. It's usually a hunkering down, like Shaun of the Dead or something, or A Quiet Place, or even Halloween, where she's hiding in the closet. Whether slow burn or relentless, this is kind of where all horror stories land, is they in these horror climaxes with these life or death confrontations. Next slide. And that's it. So just super quick before we get to our Q&A, if you want any more about this, again, my book just came out, Save the Cat Writes Horror. There's lots of this kind of stuff in there. You can go to savethecatdot.com. There's a lot of free information. I'm also doing a free Save the Cat Writes Horror webinar on September 20th. So go to the savethecatdot.com site to look for that. And I'm also doing a Monster in the House workshop that's more of a me with 8 people working on your story kind of thing, which starts October 4th. More information at savethecatdot.com. And I think that's it. I think we can go to our Q&A.
Brilliant, fantastic. Cheers for that, Jamie. Lots of stuff to think about. I've already seen some questions come in. I'll bring them up in just a second. But yeah, please do put your questions into the comments and I'll bring them up here. Elaine asks, if the protagonist doesn't know they're in a survival situation, how does the reader know? How is it best to write this?
If the protagonist doesn't know, I mean, I'll give you an example. It's not so much that the that that they're in a survival situation. Like Halloween would be a good example. We know that Michael Myers is going to end up in Laurie's house by the end of that story, right? She has no idea who he is, what he's doing, or anything, but we know he's coming, right? And we keep seeing him coming. So that's the scares in the shadows kind of story. We know it's happening on the off screen. So it can happen in the off screen movie that's away from the hero's POV, that this thing just keeps coming. You can develop the story in a way that it keeps coming and coming and coming. And then finally, there's going to be that confrontation in the end at some point.
I guess Halloween has that benefit of Laurie sort of sees things in the corner of her eye, and we sort of know there's something there. And then there's also all the POV stuff from Michael Myers. So I guess within writing a book, if you're sort of doing like a close third person narrative, you may
Yeah,
need
yeah.
to, yeah, you can have that person sort of see things in the corner or think they see stuff, or I guess then move to perhaps a separate POV or a different sort of structure,
Yeah,
perhaps.
I think separate POV is your friend in those kinds of stories. They're definitely, in a story where it is close POV and they don't know and you don't want to cheat, that would be a difficult challenge, right? How could they not know unless your character is somehow focused on something else and the audience realizes through their POV, but they're not picking up on the warning signs, which is kind of what happens with Dread a lot. So with Dread, like a character might see a sign that says warning, don't go through this door, and they might just go through the door, and for some reason their POV, you describe their inner monologue as like being oblivious to it, but we the audience know better because of we've watched a lot of horror movies or something like that. It's kind of the old I'll be right back method
Mhm.
of doing it. I mean, that's the worst version of it, but you can kind of do something like that.
We have Just Live Cat, who it could be a coincidence or someone who really adheres to the system, asking for your thoughts on psychological horror involving insanity, the mind plus the house. I guess it's very
Right.
hard. It's like your sin is you are mentally unwell or you have a sickness.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah, that's true with the sin with those kind of stories. And there's something I didn't say about the sin. The sin isn't always the person's fault. So like when they move the stones of the houses in Poltergeist, the family didn't deserve to be killed really. I mean, the father did work for the company, but he wasn't even aware of it. So it wasn't like his sin. Sometimes the sins of humanity can be brought upon the heroes of the story. It's not even their sin. So in the case of mental illness, it could be like people not helping them or just society turning a blind eye or something like that to the hero. It doesn't have to be the sin of the hero themselves. But to your point, thoughts on psychological horror? Absolutely. So body horror, the house is the body. Psychological horror, the house is the mind. That's the trap. You can't escape your own mind. Your free will is taken away if something is happening in your own psychology. Um, there's no escaping that. It's not like you can escape your own, physical dimensions or psychological dimensions.
We have a couple of questions here about writing short horror. Rich says, are there any specifics to keep in mind for writing short horror pieces as opposed to longer stories? Yeah, I'm not too familiar with short horror fiction. Like, I suppose you can't really go through all the same steps, I suppose.
It's interesting. So in my book, because I've written anthologies and I've written short horror. So I wrote a movie I wrote an anthology story for VHS 2, which is a movie. And I actually break that down in the back of my book. It's kind of like the bonus chapter. And I also break down the short film Lights Out, if you've ever seen that on YouTube. It became a feature film, but it went viral. It's a two minute short, and it hits all the Save the Cat beats. It literally hits them all. I actually write my short stories and short films to hit all the Save the Cat beats. You don't have to. Um, I teach a short film class, and I actually teach in that class Freytag's Pyramid, the classic simple kind of story structure, which you can Google if you're interested. But for me, I actually like to use the Save the Cat beat sheet for my short films. I think it gives you a fully I don't know, a fully formed story with twists and turns and ups and downs. And if you can hit all those beats, you can really pack a lot of story into a short form. But it's just one strategy. I think I've heard people say the advantage of writing some horror shorts is you can almost look at it like you're dumped into the third act. And you're just, and that's another strategy. You're just dumped into the third act of a horror story. Um, I think Stephen King writes some that he ends it after the setup and he leaves the rest to the imagination. So there's a lot of different strategies, but if you're interested, like I said, I do break down an example of using Save the Cat, all 15 beats to construct a short story.
I guess, yeah, like the first couple of beats, you could probably like dust them off in just a few sentences if need be. You can set up your
Yeah,
ordinary world and
that's that's the key. I'm not really a stickler for Blake might be mad at me for the exact number kind of thing, and it's because I come from TV. My TV book kind of says this, but I think all the beats should go in order, and I think you should have all the beats. And the only one that doesn't really fit in a short is the B story because there's not enough room really for a B story. You could have one, but if you skip it, I wouldn't blame you for it.
here's a question of mine. Did you work in TV under the old sort of, going to air model?
Yeah, no, most of my stuff has come from the streaming days, the more
Okay,
recent days. Yeah,
because I was sort of wondering, like, yeah, whether writing to
whether it's
that
changed.
format where you knew exactly where the breaks had to come in, whether that in
Yes.
some way was helpful in
So
terms of keeping that structure.
so here's the advantage of the old days compared to the new days. And this is in my book. So I wrote a book, Save the Cat Writes for TV. Um, and in the book, it basically describes how in the old days, in the episodic days, those stories were complete stories. So you had a lot of guidance. You could do a Save the Cat beat sheet for an episode. Um, but nowadays, you can't necessarily do a Save the Cat beat sheet for episode 3. Episode 3 might be the middle of a story that spans like 3 hours or something, and the beats might come in different patterns. There's all kinds of different rules now. I actually think it was easier back in those days, like you say, to hit the model because you had beats, you had a story structure. It was repeatable. You knew what to hit. Nowadays, it's both good and bad, but the freedom is yours how you want to hit the beats in television. Um, my recommendation for people, if you're interested in writing a pilot, is to write a complete story in the pilot. Is to try to make it a satisfying beginning, middle, end in the pilot. Um, don't just write the setup and say now the story starts, because you really have to give an example in your pilot episode, your first episode, of what the show will feel like. So if it's a horror show, you need horror beats, you need sub goals, you need all those things, and the way to do that is to tell a complete story in your pilot.
We've got a question here from immigration stuff. I think it probably is the thing you might get quite often. Which, yeah, they understand the structure you showed is important, but don't you think that formulas produce predictable results and might kill the writer's style? You have a thought on this?
See, I really don't believe that. I think that's a false premise because I think all the creative stuff comes from what happens in between the beats and how you execute the beats. Like my all is lost isn't necessarily your all is lost. I honestly think the creativity comes within everything else. I do, and if I showed you like movies and how they varied, um, like How to Train Your Dragon was done in a Save the Cat format, and Dallas Buyers Club was done in a Save the Cat format. And I don't think the predictability factor, if you compared the two, you'd be like, oh, they obviously did the midpoint or the catalyst here. I don't think you'd feel it in a story that's done right. Um, in a movie like How to Train Your Dragon, maybe it's comforting to kind of feel the beats as you know it. Um, but I really think you can write a movie that's completely unpredictable. I actually come from like indie horror, so most of my stuff is completely unpredictable and completely weird. And I have a whole section in the book that says the advantage of Save the Cat, if you follow the methods and stuff, is you can use the beats against them. So Barbarian is a good example. Like we look at it, we think we're watching a movie by the rules, and then it takes the beats and what we know about it, and it shifts them into something different. I think Psycho did the same thing originally. That was the classic movie, right? That did it. We think we're following a protagonist. There's no way the protagonist can die, and then we kill the protagonist, and it turns out that's a prologue. So I think there's a way to even know the beats and then subvert them. And I think subversion's a good thing. Where I see it a lot is the all is lost beat. A lot of times in horror, to trick people, we give them an all is lost, and then we give them an even worse moment. And because they're relaxed, they're like, oh, we saw the all is lost. We've seen movies before. We know the all is lost, and then you just play them, you trick them, you hit them with something even worse later on. So I'm both agreeing with you to an extent that you can, use the beats against them, but I also believe I believe the creativity comes in between the beats, not because of the beats.
Okay, we're going to finish up with a couple of recommendation questions. This one's from Fraser, probably the most important question. What's your favorite horror movie and why?
That's a good question. I keep mentioning Halloween. I really like Halloween because it was like I saw it when I was 7 years old, or something like that, and it scared me. And it's been scary. I'm a big John Carpenter fan. Uh, The Thing is another movie, again, going to John Carpenter, that I love. But if you really, really nail me down, like what my favorite horror movie is, it's Evil Dead 2 because I love horror comedy. I'm a big horror comedy fan. Um, and they don't make enough of them. They're actually really hard to sell in Hollywood. Like it's the hardest genre to sell is horror comedy. They either want comedy or they want horror, but they don't like to mix too well. But to me, Evil Dead 2 is a movie that made me laugh. It scared me. Um, it was fun. I like it for reasons other than the writing. It's got such an energy to the camera work, but it also has this do-it-yourself mentality, which I love from horror movies. I love the fact that the people that make them are often people just like us, and people that went for it and kind of followed their dream. And Evil Dead 2 has that all over it. So that's my favorite.
Yeah, it's great. It's basically a remake of the first Evil Dead with just like a modicum more money and like
That's right.
a bit of
That's right.
polish.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's a great one. Elaine says, "Can you recommend good horror novellas to read for examples of those elements? I guess shorter horror books."
It's what's funny. I don't know too many novellas. I just don't. I can't think of too many. I recently read not a novella at all, but I was a fan of Head Full of Ghosts. If you've read that from Paul Tremblay, that's my recent. That's probably one of the ones I've liked recently. Um, my a good friend of mine, co-writer, Clown in a Cornfield, Adam Caesar's book. These aren't novellas; these are novels. Um, I don't know the horror novella world that well. I more know the horror novel world. You
Uh,
could recommend them to me, actually.
Yeah, Elaine, if you have any, do drop them in the comments afterwards. But again, Jamie's book is Save the Cat Writes Horror. Head to savethecat.com to check out all those events you have upcoming. If you signed up via our newsletter or this event, we'll be sending a follow-up email with all those links in it as well. Jamie, I want to thank you for your time and really excited to dig into the book. I shall put in my order now. And to you, everyone at home, yes, head to reedsy.com/learning to see what events we have up on our Monday masterclasses. If you're interested in publishing fiction to literary magazines, we're going to have a conference this Sunday. We're bringing on managing editors of literary magazines to show you what the sort of stuff they're looking for and all that. So do check those out. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.